Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unravel the incredibly complex, deeply intertwined, and honestly, rapidly shifting relationship between India and Bangladesh. If you look at the geopolitical map of South Asia, you'd be hard-pressed to find another relationship that acts quite so much like a roller coaster, experiencing the exact same dramatic highs and devastating lows as this one.
Okay, let's dive right in by looking at the sheer scale of their shared geography. We're talking about a massive 4,096.7-kilometer border. To put that into perspective for you, that's literally longer than the drive from New York City to Las Vegas. It's the absolute longest land boundary India shares with any of its neighbors, which basically means their destinies, economies, and security, they're inherently locked together.
But this intense physical proximity, complete with all those shared languages, ethnicities, and cultures, well, it raises a really fascinating question. How exactly have these two nations, so closely bound by geography and heritage, managed such a fluctuating, whiplash-inducing history? Because, as we're about to see, this relationship is anything but a straight line.
To figure that out, this explainer is going to trace a chronological pendulum swing through their history. We'll hit the 1971 Liberation War, followed by decades of political distrust, before moving into their modern economic partnership. Then, we'll look at borders, rivers, and connectivity, and finally wrap up with the new geopolitical challenges they're facing.
All right, let's start with Section 1, the 1971 Liberation War, a shared crucible.
So, this relationship actually plays out across four distinct phases. We kick things off with the triumphant alliance at independence, then the pendulum swings violently toward military rule and distancing. From there, we shift into intense political polarization before finally swinging back to the modern economic partnership we see today.
Looking at Phase 1, 1971, India provided unstinting material, moral, and military support to the liberation movement of East Pakistan. The result? The creation of a secular Bangladesh that New Delhi strategically viewed as a compliant ally. For India, this was a massive, absolutely crucial foreign policy triumph backed by the force of arms. It delivered a death blow to Jinnah's two-nation doctrine and successfully shut down the interests of the Americans and Chinese who had backed Pakistan. But most importantly for India, it seemingly secured their eastern flank for good.
Moving on to Section 2, Decades of Political Distrust.
And this brings us to Phase 2, the period of military rule stretching from 1975 to 1990. Following a coup against Mujib, engineered by elements within the army and civil society, the dynamic entirely flipped. Suddenly, Bengali nationalism lost its traction, and Islam was declared the state religion. Dhaka's official policy essentially became keeping India at arm's length. Why? Well, by 1990, a heavy reliance on foreign aid was a defining feature of Bangladesh, so they really had to appease donors like Saudi Arabia, the US, and China. Ironically, the very powers that originally opposed their independence.
Fast forward past the ouster of military rule in 1990, and we see a fierce political rivalry emerge, drawing deep ideological fault lines. On one side, you've got the Awami League, or AI. Led by Mujib's daughter Sheikh Hasina, they aligned with India's preferred values, secularism, socialism, and Bengali nationalism. On the flip side is the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, or BNP, under Khaleda Zia. They firmly position their specific brand of Bangladeshi nationalism as being totally synonymous with standing up to perceived Indian domination.
This intense polarization ultimately led to what the source material calls the absolute nadir, literally the lowest point for Indian foreign policy in the region between 2001 and 2006. Fundamentalist Islamist forces were suddenly encouraged into the political space. During this time, the BNP and Jamaat-Islami government sponsored rampant cross-border terrorist activity into India, along with vicious attacks on domestic minorities right inside Bangladesh. The pendulum of trust, it had swung about as far away from India as humanly possible.
Which brings us to Section 3, a modern economic partnership.
The return of the Awami League government in 2009 violently swung that pendulum right back, kicking off an era of just incredible velocity. Look at this. Bilateral trade completely skyrocketed, leaping from $10.8 billion in 2020 all the way up to $18.2 billion the very next year. Bangladesh is now officially India's largest trading partner in all of South Asia.
Now, this economic explosion isn't just about trade, it is backed by massive capital flows. While the trade deficit grew an astounding 164.4% in India's favor early on in this phase, India also poured $3.11 billion of foreign direct investment right into Bangladesh. Plus, India extended a whopping $8 billion across 3 lines of credit. That makes Bangladesh the largest recipient of Indian LOC funds to date. To try and balance this out, India has granted duty-free and quota-free access to Bangladeshi exports under SAFTA since 2011. Let's look at Section 4, Borders, Rivers, and Connectivity. So how exactly does this financial partnership translate to their massive shared geography? Well, a monumental achievement of this era was the Land Boundary Agreement of 2015. For decades, these bizarre enclaves existed where citizens of one country were completely surrounded by the other. Imagine needing a passport literally just to visit your neighbor's farm. This historic treaty finally exchanged those enclaves and mapped the whole thing out, while a UN tribunal successfully resolved their maritime dispute.
This geographic cooperation fundamentally altered the security landscape, especially for India's northeast. With the 2011 Coordinated Border Management Plan, the two nations finally synergized their border forces. And, demonstrating a joint commitment against global terrorism, Bangladesh actively shut down militant training camps on its soil. They even handed over major insurgents to India, folks like Ranjan Dameri of the NDFB and Anup Chetia of ULFA.
Beyond just security, we're seeing a massive, step-by-step push to connect their economies physically. First up, they agreed to operationalize the BBIM Motor Vehicles Agreement, making passenger and goods movement across the region so much simpler. Next, they expanded inland water transit routes with brand new ports of call on rivers like the Padma and Gomti. And, in a move beautifully symbolizing this renewed connection, they jointly restored the historic Haldibari-Chilahari railway link.
Finally, Section 5, New Geopolitical Challenges.
Now, despite building all these impressive economic bridges, we have to talk about the lingering issues that heavily threaten this relationship. Water is a major sticking point here. An interim agreement for sharing the Teesta river waters has been stalled out since 2011. Along the physical border, even with those management plans in place, there have been real tragedies. 294 Bangladeshi nationals have been killed since 2010. Domestically speaking, India's Citizenship Amendment Act and National Register of Citizens have created some serious negative impressions in Bangladesh regarding India's actual intent in the region. And on the business front, India's 2017 FDI policy controversially placed Bangladesh in the exact same highly restricted investment category as Pakistan. As you can imagine, that caused some friction.
Furthermore, India faces a massive strategic hurdle just over the horizon as China aggressively expands its footprint. Bangladesh isn't just casually trading with Beijing, it is now China's second-largest arms export destination. On top of that, Chinese firms are consistently outbidding their Indian counterparts for highly lucrative infrastructure projects right inside Bangladesh. That directly threatens India's regional economic leverage.
Adding an entirely new layer to this crazy geopolitical chessboard, we're even seeing a diplomatic thaw between Bangladesh and Pakistan. High-level meetings are actually taking place where both sides have actively pledged to improve bilateral relations. This signals yet another potential major shift in regional dynamics.
Which leaves us staring at a really vital question. As this relationship evolves, will their incredible shared economic future and billions in trade be a strong enough anchor? Or, faced with unresolved river disputes, rising great power competition from China, and new diplomatic maneuvers, is the pendulum of India and Bangladesh relations getting ready to swing once more? It's definitely a geopolitical space we all need to be watching closely.